Hello and welcome to episode 256 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
I'm James Whittingham. This week, the downside of letting Chinese EVs into your home market, and it has nothing to do with panda bears crawling out of the trunk and eating your children.
Oh, they're vicious, those panda bears. USB-C charging comes to electric bikes. This is a great universal standard that can last... Oh, wait, I'm being told USB-C is now obsolete. We're moving on to USB-D.
Even small amounts of solar are changing lives of Africans. But with electricity, eventually comes Facebook, and your relatives spreading fake news about malaria vaccines.
Some good news this week. Canada's greenhouse gas emissions are trending down. When reached for comment, James Whittingham of the Clean Energy Show said, "I take full credit for this. Please join my Patreon."
All that and more on this edition of the Clean Energy Show.
I hate talking about the weather, but I can't stop myself. It's just been...
It's been a miserable year.
The worst winter. It's now April 1st as we record this, and this is not an April Fool's joke, but it's still snowing out. We have giant icebergs everywhere. Like, some have been melted a couple of weeks ago, a little bit, but it just sort of solidified all the mounds of snow into giant mounds of ice.
That's right.
So it's like we have icebergs littered throughout our city.
It's a slow melt.
Some of them on the streets. It's the slowest melt ever. It's just getting me down.
I've got a field and a park behind my house, and I can look at it from the second floor, and there's sort of a little crest where the pipelines go, so that sort of drifts. The wind blows it off, and there's not as much there, so that melts first, giving you the impression that the oil underneath of it is heating the snow and melting it, but it's not. And yeah, you can see just how slowly things are going. And the problem is when you want to go for a walk, for me, you know, the snow slowly drips, melts off a lawn and covers a sidewalk. And then by the evening when I like to walk, it's frozen and it's little layers of ice that you have to walk around. And it goes quite fast, a lot faster than this. This is a slow, painful spring. But yes, we live in Canada and not all things go well. My rotten son, who moved out to the West Coast, has been bragging about the weather there, 20-degree temperatures and trees blooming and all that stuff.
No, it's been a longer than normal ice season. And the way it works is like people will usually shovel their sidewalks or shovel their driveways or, parking lots at shopping centers. But then you just get these giant mounds of snow everywhere. And that typically just melts onto the sidewalks. Like, why did we even clear these sidewalks? Because it just melts and they get some water and then the water freezes. It's just absolutely treacherous everywhere. Speaking of weather, just a quick update from Australia. I feel like we've been ignoring our friends in Australia. Not that much news lately, but terrible, terrible flooding in the Australian outback. They had a year's worth of rain in basically one day. And all kinds of livestock has been flooded out. It's really terrible. That's what struck me was the consequences for livestock. It says 100,000 cattle and sheep are estimated to be dead or missing so far. Like, this is just an absolutely horrendous flooding. And we know from the wildfires they had a few years ago in Australia that the wildlife took a massive hit with that. So it's just always extra sad when the animals have to pay the price of all this extreme weather.
So if the country's not burning or having a vicious storm, it's flooding, and that's not good. So, it's tax season, Brian, and now I had to do taxes because we have a Patreon account and advertising. Boy, was that fun. I hate taxes to begin with because I don't know what I'm doing. I'm using software, which makes it a lot better. I mean, I was reminiscing with my partner about how we used to use papers and use a pencil for the first draft. We've come a long way, but still, I hate it. It's stressful. I'm snappy. I don't like it. And it's also the day, today is April 1st, so they've removed the consumer carbon pricing in Canada, which means in my son's case, he reported that it went down 20 cents a liter in Metro Vancouver because the provincial had a levy as well. Provincial
they tend to have some of the highest gas prices there.
No, they just had the provincial levy, I should say. In some places, just have the province do it, but the provinces wouldn't do it like ours had. Yeah, so I don't know if gas prices went down here, but they fluctuate so easily that, Putin burps and suddenly it's up another 20 cents a liter. So
up and down 20 cents a liter is pretty common.
And that was set to go up in price. It was based on a certain price per ton of carbon pollution that, gasoline or diesel would typically produce, so it would go up slowly, that it would eventually encourage you to buy an electric car. That's the idea. So there's actually a new Nissan Leaf electric car. That's my car. My first EV was my, car from a long time ago, 2013, January 2013. It was built in Tennessee and eventually imported into Canada as a used vehicle. And there was a lot of people saying that it wasn't going to come back, that there was this belief that it was gone for good. But no, they're bringing it back, and they'll probably see it in about 12 months. And it's not that significant because there's so many other cars out there. But when we started the podcast 5 years ago, stuff like this would be major news. And every little car that came out was major news, especially in North America where we have less.
No, and Nissan, as we know, has sort of been in trouble lately. Their sales are sinking, and they haven't done enough to switch to electric. So if they're going to do anything, it certainly should be electric to plan for the future. But, Nissan's still kind of in trouble.
Yeah, and I love my car. I wish it worked a bit better and I could upkeep it better, but they didn't update their cars, their EVs. Like that Nissan Leaf, first of all, it was not very attractive. It was kind of an embarrassing car to drive. Still is. And but they did that because, there was too much wind noise because it was so quiet that there was too much wind noise on the side view mirror. So they had to make really big bumps, and they decided to make buggy headlights out of that. But to show you how far it's come, Brian, the very first iteration of the Nissan Leaf, which was late 2010, has 73 miles of range, and this one's going to have 373 miles.
Yeah.
And it's going to charge a lot faster. And it's bigger. So some people are saying, well, how is it distinguishable from, we don't have a lot of information yet, but it's hard to distinguish it from the Nissan Ariya, which is their crossover SUV, pretty pricey. And, if you compare a lot of those cars to the Tesla Model Y, they don't compare, price value wise. So yeah, it's kind of hard for them to compete with Tesla, although a lot of people don't seem to be buying Tesla these days as much as they used to. And it's the value proposition of being a cheap car, if they're making it bigger, probably isn't going to be as cheap as it was. It was pretty cheap. And it's, like I said, we had examples in Colorado, which was heavily subsidized with different, tax breaks and things. You could get it for $20 a month, which is something a person with a paper route could do. And you would say, if you're a high schooler, you would save that much. You could buy a 25-year-old Honda Civic beater, and you would save that much just in gas, and you can have a brand new car with all the bells and whistles and, a sweet stereo and everything else. But yeah, and I have more information on the BYD 5-minute charging we talked about last week. Because BYD hasn't really announced this in English yet, people are trying to interpret it, and different people who are bilingual are trying to help YouTubers interpret it. The thing is, it's capable of charging with 2 cables, which is something we didn't mention. Yeah. So it has 2 ports. This is something we kind of expected might happen with semi-trailers, just to charge them faster, break down the battery into 2 sections. Well, it's not definite, but apparently some people are saying, based on their translation, that it doesn't need 2 cables. That's there, and in case you don't have a megawatt charger, you have 2 kind of 500
regular
kilowatt charger. You can still get that megawatt charging.
Okay.
Which is interesting and something that hasn't been done before and would certainly seem to add expense to the car.
Well, if you had 2 megawatt chargers, you plug the first one in and the car would be half charged by the time you plug the second one in.
Yes, it would. And if that wasn't enough, a week has gone by and there's been two announcements from competition, Zeekr and Huawei. Zeekr has a 1.2 megawatt charger coming out. This is chargers, not the cars that take the charge.
Yeah.
And a 1.5 megawatt charger from Huawei, which I don't know what their grid situation is there, but if you had a row of 30 people charging at 1.5 megawatts, there's not many grid connections in the greater world that would be able to handle that. You would have to build a nuclear plant beside it or something.
Or a lot of backup batteries.
Yeah, it's a lot of backup batteries, which is, of course, becoming more doable, and we're going to have a big story on that later in the show. But the thing is, these chargers, these BYD ones we talked about last week, they're going live next week.
Yeah.
They're not wasting any time.
Yeah, all these
they're already
announcements
deploying them.
from China about battery tech and charging tech. Yeah, it's all happening quicker than we can report on it.
If it happens in a year in North America, that's considered fast. And yeah, that's, just lots of hitches. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about a little something else, because we have this tariff war between Canada and the United States, which is threatening the Canadian economy and threatening our auto industry, which is big. We talked about how a lot of the auto industries in the world, when they're big, they have like 6% of the GDP of a country. Well, all of our companies are mostly American automakers, right? And they use our parts. And if you take that away, if you make the parts have to be made in the States, well, it's going to really screw over our economy. And then there's something that I've crossed my mind and other people too. Well, if that happens, why don't we let Chinese EVs in? This is something I see on social media a lot from people even smarter than me. And I'm pretty smart, Brian. You know that. But there are people smarter than me that are saying this, and April Fools, I'm not that smart. The problem with letting EVs into Canada was a post from one of the two Michaels that was captive in China. Okay, this is from Michael Korvig on Twitter. He's one of the two Michaels who were detained in China for a long time. I don't remember how long. It was a couple years or something, or more. 1,000 days even, or I can't remember. Yeah, it was like 3 years. And this is because the United States had an arrest warrant for the CEO of Huawei, and then she visited Canada, and we arrested her because we have an agreement with the States to arrest people, and then they punished Canada as if we could, just do something about, breaking our legal commitment, and we couldn't. So, yeah, he was an ambassador and, done sort of different things like that. So China is testing whether the prospect of big EV investment would sway Canada's trade policies, because the ambassador to Canada, I guess, has been going around. The country's ambassador, Wang Di, has done a blitz of interviews over the past week, including one with the Globe and Mail, or national newspaper, suggesting that EV giant BYD carefully thought about coming to Canada. So he's kind of dangling a little incentive there that maybe we could do something to bring that here. But its investment plan was met with huge difficulties, restrictions, and obstructions, said the ambassador, implying that they should have kind of free rein to come in here, prompting the company to successfully invest elsewhere. But a closed door can always reopen, he writes. Wang spoke of the benefits of a future investment by BYD in Canada, saying EVs are an area where the two countries could cooperate. And yeah, this is the tweet thread now from Michael Korvig, who was a Canadian business person and diplomat detained in China for years. I think he's released a couple of years ago now. The kind of relationship China wants is inherently abusive. Sure, it wants to move forward, but only if Canada makes all the concessions and without China acknowledging or redressing any of its wrongdoing. Even looking purely at economics, it comes down to what kind of economy Canada wants to have. China's proposals on trade and investment risk, reducing Canada to a vassal role of commodity and natural resource exporter, while Beijing dominates global tech and manufacturing and swamps the Canadian market with cheap imports. Canada would lose manufacturing jobs and the capacity to maintain a defense industrial base. This is important. Auto manufacturing is important because a lot of defense manufacturing comes out of the auto manufacturing business. So while China engages in one of the largest military buildups in history, this is all happening. Could all happen while China does that, and then, we become very weak. We don't have a lot of options. We let our tech industry get reduced, and they have a military advantage. The notion that China offers sincere solutions to disputes with the Trump administration, is magical thinking. All of the things that Canada sells to the U.S., what can it realistically persuade China to buy more of instead? There's really not enough to make a real difference. Canadians need to understand that the CCP's agenda is fundamentally hostile to the interests of open societies. It seeks to create a sphere of influence in the Asia-Pacific region, dominate the international order, and reshape it according to its own authoritarian vision. It wants to make Canada dependent and so vulnerable to coercive pressure and leverage while ensuring its own invulnerability to external pressure. To deal with that complex challenge, Canada's next government should define and keep refining a China strategy that balances values and interests and national security imperatives with economic benefits. Key elements include investment screening, restrictions on high-tech transfers, countering Chinese espionage, cyber attacks, political interference, and repression of ethnic minorities in Canada, and incentives for Canadian businesses to diversify to other markets and reduce dependence on China. And he was on, there was a discussion about this on CBC Radio, and I'll have a link there in your show notes. It was The Current that was on. I thought it was interesting. It's easy for me to say, who's a person and like you who wants the energy transition to happen as fast as possible and get oil off the market. But there is challenges with China, obviously, and their goals don't meet our goals.
Yeah, and they're looking for an opening because our trade relations with the U.S. are now changing and in flux, and they're looking for opportunities to maybe shift that into their direction. And Canada is definitely looking for other trade opportunities since we don't want to be at war with our trading partners. But yeah, this stuff is incredibly complex, and you don't want to become reliant on China for anything. All right, so moving along, this is from Electrek. USB-C charging comes to electric bikes. Now, I have to admit, this is something I never thought about, but now that this story is here, it makes perfect sense. In my world of electronic devices, everything is kind of moving to USB-C. And we know that, even the iPhone moved to USB-C charging, and that was partly due to pressure from the European Union because they want to have one standard for everything, so you don't have to have 50 different chargers with 50 different connectors. But yeah, I hadn't really thought about this for electric bikes, but it makes sense. Had you thought about this before?
No, because I thought it was too small of a current for an electric bike battery.
Yeah, well, you can plug in a 140-watt laptop charger. So that would appear to be enough to charge an electric bicycle.
Is that USB-C? 140 watts goes through USB-C?
Yes, yeah. So that's what I like, the sort of biggest laptop connectors can do.
Some laptops are charged by USB-C. I didn't know that. Mine is not. I've got a big brick on my gaming laptop that I use to edit videos for the show because it has to have a clean, sine wave or whatever for the power source.
Right. Yeah, my MacBook Pro, it charges with MagSafe, which is Apple's magnetic connector, which is sort of proprietary. But then it's got 4 USB-C ports, and you can actually charge it from any of those ports, which is super cool.
I wonder if you could charge mine, and I just don't know it.
Yeah, it's possible, yeah. USB-C ports tend to be quite versatile that way, and including, so this bicycle we're talking about here, it's from Ampler Bikes, which is in Estonia, and you can then charge your phone with your bicycle because USB-C has that versatility, right? So if your bike's got a full charge, but your phone doesn't, you can use the USB-C to go into your phone and charge your phone. So yeah, it just surprised me that I hadn't been thinking about this before, but absolutely all e-bikes should eventually move to this USB-C because, and you look at stuff like in the film industry, digital cameras and digital recorders and audio recorders and everything, you can now travel around with pretty much just USB-C charging for all of your devices. And a lot of filmmakers now have those sort of big power bricks. So, like a 100, amp hour or watt hour battery.
Yeah.
Sort of brick sized, and you can travel with those. Anything under 100 you can carry on an airplane. And so you can now power your bike with one of those. Like if you're already carrying around bricks to charge your other devices, to run your other devices, and your bike is running out of power, you can run it off any one of these USB bricks.
So last time we got family cell phones, we got them at Costco. That's the only way we could, make it work. Like they had this deal on every once in a while. And they said, well, here's your phones, and we have this deal. We're clearing out these bricks for $6 from $100. I said, I don't know what you're doing. Get away from me. Like, why are you squishing something on me? And then finally he said, fine, we'll take 2. And I regret not getting more because they're really handy.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have one right in front of me. I don't have one right in front of me, but they're about yay big. They're not that big.
Yeah.
But they work great, and they wireless charge too. There's a little wireless charger right on them.
Wow.
And different formats of USB ports, and it has a digital display of the power that it has percentage-wise. And my daughter, sometimes she'll forget to charge her cell phone overnight because she'll crash.
Yep.
Using her cell phone.
Yep.
Glued to her face. And then she would be a very depressed girl going to school. So I just give her one of those and she's good to go. And now she just has one. But Yeah, they're great. And yeah, my e-bike battery has one of the old style USB-A ports
Oh, okay.
on it. So that's for charging outward, though, as far as I know. No, I wouldn't try it. I wouldn't want to break anything. But yeah, it does power out. And we use it in power outages if somebody's cell phone is low. And it will last a long time. You know, that's a $300-400 battery there.
Yeah, but they come in all different sizes, which is amazing. So yeah, like very small USB batteries, and then yeah, these sort of brick-sized ones. And if you're in the film industry, even larger, so you can power all of your cameras for hours and hours.
And my battery's 5 years old now, but the energy density would have improved, so you would get more power in that package and weight than you probably did 5 years ago, which is handy if you're riding a bike.
Yeah, so I don't know why I took a company from Estonia to be the first to do this, but they're called Ampler Bikes, and they've got a couple of models coming out. First one is 3,000 euros, so these aren't cheap. 3,000 euros or 3,500 euros. You can order them now. It sounds like it's more of a European concern, so I don't know if we'd really be getting these yet in North America. But yeah, I think it's only a matter of time now where all the other e-bike manufacturers eventually go to something standard. Because yeah, I have this separate power adapter for my e-bike.
Yeah.
And it's different than every other power adapter.
You got to go searching for it, and you may not know what it is. I label all my adapters now.
Yes, I do as well, yeah.
I bought a labeler 20 years ago,
and
it just ran out because my daughter was using it. And it just ran out. So I bought tape, which was a lot cheaper than you can buy. I had the option of buying 5 rolls of tape for like a couple bucks more, but I thought it took me 20 years to use one. Why would I buy? I'm not going to live that long. I actually know I'm not going to live 5 times 20 years more. That's a given unless science can put my head in a jar somewhere.
Yeah, no, I love label makers. I've been using one for years and years. We've gone through several rolls of tape, but they're maybe smaller than the one that you have. But yeah.
Labels could change. I know it's controversial. I know it's geeky, but labels will change your life, people. You will save countless hours of time and frustration having things labeled that need labeling, and you'll know what that is.
I'm a huge, huge fan.
Yeah, so 3.5 hours for a full charge and 2.5 is, that's not bad. That's kind of like what you would do. Yeah. So why not standardize the connection then?
It's a universal adapter, so if you lose the one for your bike, then, you just use the one for your laptop. It's all USB-C.
Yeah, that's another nice thing. Or maybe you forget it and you're at work and you want to charge your battery and you thought, oh, darn, I forgot my charger.
Yeah.
And then you can reach around and get one that maybe you use for your phone as a backup or something like that. That would be nice.
Yeah, so I feel silly that I hadn't thought of that before, but it's an absolute no-brainer. The e-bike should be USB-C.
You could be rich, astronaut rich, Brian, if you had thought of that only earlier. The mission to electrify Africa might finally be underway, and of course that's solar. I did a lot of research into this story this week because I thought it was quite interesting. It comes from a Bloomberg story, but the Bloomberg story doesn't tell the whole story. This goes back 20 years. And, 20 years ago, solar panels are not what they are today. They were expensive. They were not as powerful. One panel did not put out as much power as they do today. Well, first of all, if you live in urban Africa, you probably don't have access to power 24 hours a day. Even in South Africa, they've had a lot of outages recently. They're trying to rectify that now. But there's a lot of places in Africa where the grid in cities, we're talking hundreds of millions of people here, are not running for more than like a quarter of the day sometimes. And so, solar panels are important there, and people use backup power from generators and so forth. But if you're in a village, they're not going to build the grid out to a village. Very rarely are they doing that. So there's a lot of people in Africa who are maybe in poverty and they can't get out of that poverty, but a lousy solar panel, Brian, even a small one, the size of a phone book, can actually change a life. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and we have the story from Bloomberg. Yeah, we have there's an example of a small store, which is very basic. It's just, there's not much in there, a rudimentary shelf and, hodgepodge of different items that can be for sale. And the solar panels that you can see on the picture there outside the store are tiny. They're the size of a couple of textbooks, and yet that has made what's going on in there possible. When strips of solar panels arrived in his remote village in northeast Zambia, this is from Bloomberg that I'm reading, Damaske Mwale, Saw an opportunity. He bought land, built a little house, and set up a business, including a grocery store and a hall to charge people to watch football matches. So he built a hall because he had power. He could get a TV that no one else had, and maybe a satellite or something, or maybe internet or something like that to be able to watch the football matches. From there, that's where my life changed, he said. He's 41 years old. He said, as he sat in his living room next to his small store, even his children's school grades improved because they were able to study at night, he said. Because, in these villages, the sun goes down and everything comes to a stop.
Yeah.
Basically, everything comes to a stop. No learning, no, conversation can happen, but not much goes on. But this movement started 20 years ago, I was surprised to learn. But it was slow because of the economics of it, and now it's moving a lot faster. Back then, they had to carry around a solar panel and educate people what it was, what electricity was.
Yeah.
This is a light. This light that comes from this panel, I know it's crazy, but it will change your life. And so they had to educate people, then they had to train people. And they were using this school had one fluorescent light tube outside of it 20 years ago. This is an old YouTube video I found. And children, they spent their evening there because they didn't want to go home and sit in the dark. So they all sat around with their study papers. Maybe for the video, they were very well behaved, but, it was a social occasion to go to where the light was because it was pitch black everywhere else. And that school, Brian, had the highest test scores in the region because they had light.
Yeah.
Because of one little solar panel and one little light. And we take that for granted in the first world where we live. An entrepreneur bought a solar kit and opened a barber shop and phone charging business. Because he was able to get a loan, they would charge him 25% up front, 25% every quarter of a year until he paid it off. And it wasn't a lot of money, but then, of course, people don't have a lot of money in some of these poorer villages that don't have access to energy. And the barbershop was just a hair trimmer, electric hair shearer trimmer.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the people in the village, that's what they had. They just had sheared hair off. So he could, without skill, barber training, as long as he had power to power this thing, everyone was a customer. Like everyone was a potential customer. And the side business was charging flip phones at the time.
Yeah.
So the people who had flip phones to call relatives, they didn't do a lot of communicating on those phones with text back then, but they could do that. And so there was a bar that served, and this is just a shack essentially, this bar, they would serve beer, and the beer was warm. They got electricity, they had a cooler, the beer was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And they sold more beer because beer is more pleasant, cool than warm. So he had a thriving business with just a little bit of electricity that is democratized for everyone from our friends, the solar panel. Yeah, and another person recently started a nightclub with LED flashing lights, maybe I don't know what he had for speakers, but it could have just been a good Bluetooth speaker for a whole nightclub and cool beer and some music blasting, and you have yourself a nightclub that people wanted to go to because there was absolutely nothing like that before a little bit of electricity got there. So there's a lot of microgrids and mini grids. Some are tied to the grid if they're near a grid, some are not. There's solar panels, and some of them, Brian, are about the amount of panels that you have on your roof.
Yeah.
What's your output again?
I think I've got 31 panels, and it's about 8 kilowatts.
Yeah, but if you use that in a African village, that doesn't power your life with your electric vehicles and heaters and all that. But as far as lights go, that could power just with one LED bulb in each facility could power a heck of a lot. And of course, it's backed up with batteries, and some of them are modern batteries, but 20 years ago, they were lead acid batteries.
Sure. Old car batteries can be cheap and still usable.
If you know what you're doing, and they're pretty easy to train other people to set these things up. So putting microgrids in villages is starting to really take off. What is a microgrid? Typically no access to a central grid, so it's off on its own. It's kind of an island of power. And they use software to control distributed renewable energy resources like solar panels and the batteries that store that solar, and it brings it into the evening. They displace diesel generators, which are expensive to run and frequently unreliable, especially if there are interruptions in fuel deliveries. The technology is powering homes, businesses, schools, healthcare facilities, and agricultural operations, bolstering the economy and creating new jobs for residents. It even improves access to legal services, enabling residents to settle disputes that might have otherwise gone unresolved for years. Streetlights are improving community safety. They're not streetlights like we have, but any sort of light, just any sort of light out in the community, and extending the day for villages that used to essentially shut down with each evening sunset. Now, I even saw one person on a bike who was sort of the local fixer of things, mechanical fixer, and he had a grindstone that he was riding a bike and spinning the grindstone to grind down metal to fix something.
Yeah.
That's no longer necessary. Plunging solar panel prices, more business-friendly regulation by African governments and international funding are now spurring a rapid rollout from Nigeria to Madagascar. This convergence of price and funding has solar hitting a tipping point in Africa. Access to electricity in the sub-Saharan region ranges from 1% of the population in South Sudan to 94% in South Africa. Even South Africa doesn't have full penetration of electricity access. So if it reduces illegal migration, and if it keeps people happy in their countries, it creates a marketplace for those products and their intellectual property and technology. And people are going to university that never went to university before because they had access to electricity.
Yeah.
A little bit of electricity, which is from solar and a little bit of battery storage. In Zambia, the village of Chitandika got its mini grid in 2019, okay? I'm not going to pronounce everything in my sentence here because it's just going to make a fool out of me. The area has turned into a hive of activity thanks to the arrival of the solar panels, from a brightly lit barbershop to schools being able to provide more IT support for kids without having to use expensive petrol-fueled generators. One head teacher said the whole environment has changed with better lighting and more appliances. His school has gone from having 6 teachers to 28 because it's more attractive for people to teach there. So the electricity has attracted more teachers. And that's what we want, Brian. We want Africa to get out of poverty. We want everywhere that is in poverty to get out of it. And I may be a dreamer, but I think that AI, where there is no teachers, will be able to teach kids. It may not be the best teacher by itself, but it'll be an education anyway.
Yeah.
That better than none, and that can get people out of poverty.
Well, just access to the internet everywhere, which is the other thing that's going to come along with this. With access to electricity, you can get access to the internet, and access to the internet is access to world knowledge. It can be really a life-changing thing as well.
If your kid is discerning, like mine are, I don't know how I got them that way, but they actually seek out good information and know a hell of a lot. I mean, the amount that they know, and my daughter doesn't even get good grades in all of her classes, but she knows practically everything there is to know. It's incredible what is out there if you get the right information. So it means if someone wants to weld an ox cart, they can now do it in this village that I'm talking about. This local mechanic has got all kinds of customers now because he can do a little bit of welding. And before the grid, I was just doing mechanics. He says, now I'm earning much, much more revenue. In Malawi, access to electricity has almost doubled to 27% in just the last couple of years. Doubled.
Yeah.
Access to electricity is doubled. That is a fast pace, and it wouldn't be possible without solar. The president of the African Development Bank said, I can't think of anything more important than electricity. That is, well, aside from air and water and food, but basically what he's saying.
All right. Well, that's great news. Okay, we want to take a moment to thank our Patreon members who have signed up for the Clean Club. You get a shout out on the show at the first of each month. So we're going to mention a bunch of Patreon supporters here. First of all, the Clean Club executive is Green Bastard and Brent Routley. Clean Club Plus, Bob Armstrong and Wes S. And in the Clean Club, Andy Fessler, Josh Engen, Sean Ennis, Sean Hines, Timo Kellenberger, Peter O'Donnell, Weldon Penner, Roshan Gervais, Richard W. So thanks for everyone. We do have a Patreon bonus episode coming up. We're going to record it later this week. So if you sign up for a Patreon tier that includes that, you get to hear this bonus episode that we do once a month.
And all the ones that we've done before now, as well as all the other lovely perks. We have some listener mail, but Brian, it's time to dip into the old mailbag. says, you mentioned AC charging up to 22 kilowatts.
Yeah, this for electric cars. They have a DC charging system and an AC charging system. And, typically it's 7 kilowatts, 10, 11 kilowatts. And we'd heard up to 22 kilowatts for an AC
Which is
charger.
rare. It's rare. And you have to pay extra sometimes, a lot extra to have that. But then most homes don't have that. That's the issue. You would have to have double the electricity to be able to do that. Like I've got a 7 kilowatt charger, which is like 32 amps or something like that on a 40 amp circuit. That was doable, but going beyond that, not doable in my house really, without doing something special. And there's some workarounds, but this is Timo on Patreon. He says we had a Renault Zoe in Europe, which was capable of charging up to 43 kilowatts with an AC connector. Would that have anything to do with the way their power is out there in Europe with the higher voltage?
Yeah, they tend to have, the 240 volt is the standard in Europe. So I imagine it makes it easier to do stuff like that.
Because you can boil your water twice as fast for tea in Britain
as we've
than you can here in North America.
Discussed many times.
Unless you're Brian Stockton, went to London and discovered, hey, why can't I do this?
Yes. So I have a 240 watt kettle in my house that I bought from the UK and then switched it to a North American 240 plug and have a North American 240 plug in my kitchen.
Do you still appreciate that when you're boiling water, or have you forgotten?
The best. No, it's every single day. It's amazing because
you still remember the old days, the hard old days of.
Because every once in a while, like if you're in a hotel or something, you have to charge with a stand, and it's just insane to me how long it takes. It's ridiculous. All right, we have some more listener mail. Good morning, James and Brian. I saw a local news story about this documentary this morning and thought it was right up your alley. It's showing, maybe premiering, at a local film festival in Sebastopol, California. I think Brian should put this.
Have you heard of that, Sebastopol?
No, I had not heard of Sebastopol before.
Is it real? Maybe I should check.
We should have verified this before. We're being punked right now. Okay, the letter continues. I think Brian should put this film festival on his list. Sebastopol is a nice little town nestled in a remnant redwood forest north of San Francisco. Have a great day and keep up the great work. I really enjoy your podcast. That's Eric from the Bay Area. James, is Sebastopol, California a real place?
I've got one with foreign language writing here, which looks like Czechoslovakia or somewhere. California. Yeah, there is one in California.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Where is it, though? It's not that small. It's kind of in the middle of California between Santa Rosa and the coast. Yeah, it checks out. It's north of the Bay Area.
Well, it sounds lovely. And I do like visiting kind of smaller towns like that. And they're great for things like film festivals. It's usually a nice kind of community atmosphere. Anyway, the movie that they're talking about in the article is called The White House Effect. And it's a documentary that's showing at this festival. And it's about the George H.W. Bush presidency from 88 to 92 when they were first starting to talk about dealing with climate change. And so the documentary it sounds like it's about how all that went south, that they were planning to do something about climate change.
Oh, really?
Back in the George H.W. Bush White House, but many competing interests. It sounds like it squashed that. So yeah, it does sound like a really interesting film.
And that's from Eric in the Bay Area, so he should know. We've heard from Eric plenty of times, and he'd be familiar with the Bay Area, and he probably wouldn't pull one over on us unless he knew we were going to read this on April 1st, which we are. I'm staying away from the internet today. Everything's a joke, and I like jokes, but I don't like being the victim of a joke.
No, April Fool's Day jokes are the dumbest thing ever. Please don't do them.
Contact us. We'd love to hear from our listeners. Please contact us by email. Our email address is cleanenergyshow, all in one word, @gmail.com. And we'd love to hear from you on voicemail, too. And we can hear your voice at speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow, all one word as well. And, of course, you can join the conversation on our Patreon page and get access to additional content. And that's where all of our social media posts go there for free if you want to see us all in one place without controversy. It's all there.
All right. We have a really good news story here. I always kind of wonder how these things are actually progressing because we know everyone's trying to cut their greenhouse gas emissions and countries around the world have made all kinds of pledges. So this story from the Globe and Mail this week, Canada's greenhouse gas emissions are down as of 2023. So these are the most recent numbers that they have. A national tally of Canada's climate progress indicates that greenhouse gas emissions fell slightly in 2023 and are now about 8% lower than they were in 2005, which is not so bad. I mean, it's not where we need to be.
Yeah.
So
now that we've reduced the carbon pricing on consumer goods, and all goods in our province are most backwards place on earth province of Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
Shout out to our premier. Yeah, and my kid's going to drive more now.
Yeah.
He's an environmentalist, but he's going to drive more because driving is his favorite thing. And so he's got to go explore more, and he's happy about it.
Yeah. And of course, we have an election here coming up in Canada about a month from now. We do have a new prime minister who was appointed after Justin Trudeau stepped down, but he's now going to have to face an election. And yeah, that's in about a month's time. And climate is certainly one of the topics. I don't know.
Yeah. People don't seem to care about climate anymore.
Yeah.
You know, it's a backburn. Actually, there's one issue in Canada, and that's Mr. Orange Man south of the border.
Yeah.
So that is the dominant single ballot box issue for everyone here. But Brian, had this come out earlier, they might have been able to defend the carbon pricing. But
yeah,
it was it was a single issue that the opposition Conservative Party was running on, was axe the tax. It's killing us all. It's raising the price of groceries by 3 cents. And, you know, we can't have that in inflationary times.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work. Yeah. That was their argument too. But now we have evidence that was part of the system. It's not everything, but it was working. So 2023 was a bounce back year from the pandemic. You can't say it was, you know, a lot of things really took off in 2023.
Yeah, well, there's sort of further from the article here. So excluding 2020, when, of course, emissions dropped dramatically because of COVID-19, 2023 is tied with 2021 as the lowest annual total since 1996. So emissions going down. So what Canada has committed to is to cut emissions by 40 to 45% below the 2005 level. So what we've learned is we've already got 8% of that, and we've now got 5 years left to get the other, 30-some%. So we're not making as much progress as we should, but I always love reporting these good news things because sometimes it seems like, nothing's actually happening, but emissions are down. And according to this report, it's mostly due to easy gains in the electricity sector from shutting down coal plants. This is the lowest hanging fruit.
Which we're not doing here.
We're not doing where James and I live, but in other parts of Canada, we've shut down a lot of coal plants since 2005. So sounds like that's mostly what's responsible for
even
this 8%.
Even Alberta shut down their coal plants, Brian. Even the old capital of North America, practically, next to Texas. But yeah, I'm kind of wondering what's on my mind now is what's going to happen 5 years from now. Because my feed is full of new Chinese EVs coming down in price, doing more things, more models, like countless models. And even the ones that do burn gas, they're a full EV most of the time. And, BYD doesn't make combustion cars. They only make EVs and plug-in hybrids with a long range of electric range. So you're never burning gas. And this is, getting into Latin America and Africa a little bit and India. 5 years from now, I wonder if that's going to help us with our emissions, because most of our emissions come from oil and gas. And we have some of the most expensive oil and gas extraction in the world, which they think is going to go on forever, essentially their lifetimes.
Yeah. Well, the transportation sector in North America is not moving fast enough. There will definitely be fewer emissions in 2030 because of more electric vehicles. But as we know, we're just moving more slowly than other countries in terms. So to get our emissions down by 2030, down 40 to 45% lower, there's probably some more coal plants we close. And yes, transportation a little bit, but it's going to be tough to hit those numbers.
That's encouraging. But I'd like to see oil and gas go away, in case you didn't know. That's how I feel. Coming up next is the lightning round. Stick around. It's time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
Hydro-Quebec's main transmission line into New England, known as the Phase 2 line, stopped exporting any meaningful amount of power 2 days after President Donald J. Trump announced tariffs on Canada imports went into effect, the first wave of tariffs. Yeah, so we have a ton of hydro in Quebec because that's what they built.
Yep.
There was lots of it available, easy to build, 30 years ago or whatever, whenever they did most of the construction. And so they were exporting to the States. I haven't heard that they'd stopped this, and that's not really showing up on the news. But they say it was just because of
pricing
markets.
Yeah, like the price for power in New England is apparently low right now. So that's what Hydro-Quebec is saying. It's not for any political reasons. But having stopped it for a month is kind of a big deal. That doesn't normally happen. And as we get into the summer air conditioning season, presumably they'll start exporting again, but I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I'm assuming renewables were causing those wholesale prices to go down.
Yeah.
Booming electric vehicle sales in China mean that gasoline consumption probably peaked in 2023, according to Chinese oil giant Sinopec. Sales of the fuel averaged 13.2 million tons a month last year. That is down from 9% from the year before. So, yeah, a lot of that has to do with the housing market crash and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's also rapid electrification of transportation. Pakistan and Saudi Arabia have jumped up the rankings to become some of the largest markets for Chinese solar panel exports in 2024. That's from Carbon Brief. Saudi Arabia?
Yeah.
What are they up to, Brian? What are they up to? What are they doing? They're exporting so much oil and making they're a good place for solar. Uruguay EV sales report, guess what? 300% growth year over year. Record February brings the battery electric vehicle market share over 15% in Uruguay. And those are probably largely Chinese-made EVs. It's time for a CES Fast Fact. Chinese commuters spend an average of 1.6 hours stuck in traffic.
Wow.
1.6 hours a day, Brian, stuck in traffic. Or if you watch YouTube, days, literally days, there's been traffic jams. So that's interesting because this is why their car makers are making the back seats so luxurious, because you're stuck in a car for a long period of time.
Yeah.
If you're have other people from your work going with you to work and it's full of people and you're stuck for 1.6 hours, this is why they're making so much entertainment options and nice places to be, because they're stuck there for so long. That's according to one China auto analyst. Over the past decade, insurable losses in Alberta, the province next to us in Canada with all the oil and mountains and forests that have been burning, those insurable losses have surged by almost 500%, 495% in the past decade. But keep mining that oil, Alberta. You're doing a great job. Waymo in San Fran, from a Twitter user named Colin Helbut, he said that when he got out of the car, he left a small brown paper bag in the Waymo. This is a driverless taxi in the back seat with his dog's important medicine in it. And the car detected the object automatically and immediately used the external speakers to notify the driver, who was running and across the street by this point, that he had left something in the car.
Yeah.
So that's a little taste of our robot overlord world if we get into robotaxis one day. Hyundai's Georgia, United States EV plant is officially open and ready to launch the 3-row Ioniq 9, and hopefully they don't break down for new users. A new JFK Terminal 1 is going to deploy electric ground handling fleet. That's all the vehicles that run around on the runway. Well, you're not going to have to breathe gas and diesel fumes if you're a worker there at the airport anymore. Chinese eVTOL operator, those are basically drones that carry people, Brian, electric drones that carry people. They've nabbed approval for paid commercial flight operations. So we've talked about this since the early days. It's officially started.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Customers can now purchase a flight ticket to take a low-altitude tour around 2 popular regions of China. I'll wait a few years. I'll wait a few years. I don't know about you. And my question is, do they have parachutes? They're probably safer than a helicopter. I mean,
probably, yeah.
They say that, some of these things, 2 of the propellers, there's like 5 propellers. If 2 go down, you're still good.
Yeah.
I'm still going to wait. Not that I don't trust them. I just don't want to be, a guinea pig. Hyundai Ioniq 5 is single-handedly rewriting the rules on EV longevity by driving over 360,000 miles. This is one Hyundai. What do they call them in the States? Hyundai?
Yeah, Hyundai.
Hyundai, some people call them. Pronounce it. Or 579,000 kilometers on its original battery. And get this. This is something I envy. The battery still had 87% battery health, which is insane.
Yeah, that's great.
That's an old battery. And he was fast charging it, nothing but fast charging. So they say that fast charging is hard on your battery. Not always the case, though.
Yeah, we've had stories about this in the past with studies comparing slower charging to faster charging. And yeah, there isn't necessarily a definitive truth to that fast charging is worse for your battery.
There's lots of different, battery chemistries out there. But the Hyundai Ioniq 5 is capable of charging, 350 or close to 350?
Yeah, that's
it's pretty high. It's pretty high. It's an 800-volt architecture. The car is still running fine, by the way. This next one is from businessgreen.com. While we keep waiting for the Tesla Semi to do something significant, Volvo Trucks debuts a new model that can travel 600 kilometers on a charge and carry 44 tons, and it charges up in only 40 minutes. This will take some time to play out, Brian, but the internal combustion engine is done.
Great.
And finally this week, the Chinese battery company Cornex. We haven't talked about them before on the show, but they make grid-powered batteries. Those look like, containers on the back of a semi-truck, except shorter. In fact, they're only about 20 feet long, and a semi could hold about 2.5 of them if you put them next to each other. But that's what grid storage batteries are. They're located next to a big grid connection, and there's a bunch of them around, and they store up solar power or wind power and dispense it when the solar goes off. And then it also stabilizes the grid by meeting demand instantaneously when there's a sudden need for demand. Well, they've increased their latest battery capacity by 50%. So the same storage container, 20 feet long, holds 50% more power. Just like we talk about incremental increases in batteries, and that's going to save the world. Well, holy crap, 50% more in the next iteration. And it's going to be mass-produced by June 30th, 3 months from now. This is not, China does things way differently than we do, and it's kind of overwhelming sometimes how they do it. They've improved the individual battery cells, because these things are made up of smaller battery cells, lithium-ion usually, but sometimes different. Those cells are greatly improved, and they enhance the power grid by dispensing it at a moment's notice. This is from PV Magazine. And this makes solar last longer. These containers, this grid storage battery, which is still a relatively new thing, right? I mean, it's been proven, I think, reliable. We even have some near my house, but they claim they don't use them as much as they want to because they're ignorant. This makes solar last longer. It stabilizes the grids, and it controls the demand. When there's high demand, you have to build expensive power plants when people come home from work just to power those 3-4 hours. Well, the batteries can do that with stored up solar during the daytime, and that reduces the cost of power greatly because the power grid company doesn't have to spend as much. So those 20-foot long boxes, which looks like something you'd load on a semi-trailer, but in reality, like I said, 2.5 would probably fit on there because semi-trailers are up to 60 feet long, I think, in cases in North America. Get this, Brian, each one stores 7 megawatt hours of electricity.
Yeah.
7 megawatt hours.
Yeah, that's, maybe what you might use in your house for an entire year.
In one of these containers that's 20 feet long, basically a shed, a garden shed.
Yeah.
A big garden shed, but a garden shed.
You could get one delivered to your house once a year and then power your house for the year. Does it have USB-C ports on it?
No, but I think you just came up with $1 million idea.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's the new off-the-grid strategy.
That's not the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I'm thinking about it because you live out in the middle of a forest.
Yeah.
And you don't want to get a grid connection, and there's a fire road, then somebody just delivers you a battery and swaps it out like a propane tank for your barbecue.
Well, a lot of those properties, they have to get fuel oil delivered, once a year or twice a year. So instead of getting your oil delivered, just get a giant battery delivered.
We talk about batteries being swapped in cars. Neo is the battery swapping. Well, I think you just came up with a crazy idea. We better patent that before one of our listeners does. I'm withholding the podcast so I can do the patent application.
That's right.
Where's my patent lawyer?
We need to get to work on that.
7 megawatt hours of energy. That could power 6,300 homes for an hour. Just about one 20-foot battery container. It's amazing. And you don't just have one container, you put a bunch of them. So I really think, when something goes up like this, the price doesn't go up 50%. The storage capacity, so the unit price is probably dropped significantly. Maybe not as much as you would think, but because they're not making it for the exact same price, but they might be, or they might be in a couple of years making it for the same price as the ones that are existing. So that's going to kill fossil fuels. And that's what we'd like to say on the show, something that kills fossil fuels. And 50% improvement in the amount of energy you can store in one container. This is a huge boost for the energy transition when stuff like this happens. This is one company. Who knows what other companies are doing?
And we're going to end our show on that good news for this week. You can contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com, around social media. We're Clean Energy Pod. Please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That always helps out the show when people give us a nice rating and a nice comment. So please do that if you can.
Join our Patreon today and as a paying member and get access to our exclusive Patreon episodes, which we're recording later this week. And we do them one a month, so there's a few of them you can go back and listen to. You'll also get ad-free episodes, exclusive access to Clean Energy Show Discord server, discounts at our merchant store, which you can also buy merchandise if you like. Lots of stuff there. Early access to our episodes before the public, behind-the-scenes material, and private updates. Thank you. Shout-outs on our podcast, which you just heard earlier, and video credits on our video podcast. Thank you all for supporting our work, whether you pay or not. If you're on Patreon and follow us, it helps us a lot, and we'll see you there soon, and see you here on our audio podcast in 7 days.
See you next week.